Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 11, Brahmanic Mysteries from the Adepts in the Eastern Esoteric Tradition by Manly Palmer Hall. Part 1, The Light of the Vedas. Brahmanic Mysteries. In ancient times, the caste of the Brahmans exercised unlimited authority over all the departments of Hindu life. Supported by the weight of tradition, this remarkable order of men was responsible for the development and perfection of early Indian culture. These men were a class apart, separated from non-Brahmans by the inflexible rules of the caste system. It would be a mistake, however, to accept the popular misconception that the term Brahman is synonymous with aristocracy. The members of this social order were not feudal princes or rich and powerful overlords. Their privilege came not from their worldly goods or their noble ancestry. They were recognized as inspired leaders, sages, and illumined priests who devoted their lives to the mysteries of the Vedas. Buddha defined a Brahman not as one born into that caste, but as a noble human being dedicated to the service of truth. Confucius used the term superior man to identify a person living according to the highest standards of enlightenment, ethics, and morality. In the writings of Plato, a class called the philosophic elect was introduced and advanced as a natural aristocracy suitable for leadership in society. As a sacerdotal order, the Brahmans were the custodians of the esoteric keys of the Hindu religion. After the rise of Buddhism, the Brahman initiates opposed the Buddhist arhats, whom they regarded as endangering the legitimate descent of the secret doctrine. This divergence of convictions caused the Buddhist teachers to leave India and establish their schools in other Asiatic countries. In spite of popular opinion to the contrary, the deeper aspects of Brahmanical learning have not been revealed or exposed to foreigners. The one exception was Pythagoras, who became a Brahman by adoption and was initiated at Elephanta and Ellora. He was given the name Yavancharya. His name is said still to be preserved in the records of the Brahmins as the Ionian teacher. Even after the rise of Muslim power in India, the initiates of the Brahmin temples and monastic communities elected a council of superiors or elders presided over by a Brahmatma. He was a supreme pontiff and the sole guardian of the highest mysteries and formulas. This hierophant was always an aged man and served as the teacher and initiator of those who had earned adeptship. So strict were the obligations of these Eastern rites, and so heavy the penalty for profaning them, that the very existence of the system has been questioned by Occidental scholars. All Brahmins pass through 3 symbolical initiations, which, however, may be considered as constituting admission into the caste. It is likely that these rites have descended from the tribal rituals of earlier peoples. The first initiation is given at birth, and the child receives from the family astrologer his mystery or sacred name. This he will never reveal under any circumstance. The second initiation occurs at the 7th year, when the boy receives the 3-strand Brahmanical cord, which he will wear until death. The third initiation takes place at adolescence, about the 11th or 12th year, when the youth is accepted into his caste with appropriate ceremonies. When he becomes a Brahman, he assumes all the obligations and responsibilities peculiar to this group. By implication, these rituals confer membership or citizenship in the empire of the enlightened. Thus, the entire caste is one school of the mysteries, dedicated to a code of laws more severe than those imposed upon the members of other classes. Early in the development of Brahmanism, the adept tradition was revealed through the legends associated with the rishis. These are generally regarded, like the Greek heroes, as an intermediary order of human beings partaking of divine and mortal attributes. In the order of created beings, these holy sages are placed below such godlings and invisible creatures as belong to the suites of the superior divinities. Although the rishis were mortals, they possessed superhuman wisdom and power equal to, and in some instances greater than, the gods themselves. 3 orders of these wonderful persons can be distinguished in the religious literature of the Hindus. The first and highest group includes those saints who reside with the gods and serve as counselors and ministers. Next are the Brahma rishis, venerated as the revealers of the esoteric tradition. The third circle is made up of the Raja rishis, those of royal or princely origin who led their tribes and nations as illumined rulers. These sages have flourished in all the periods of the world. Some participated in the creation of the solar system. Others appeared at the time of the compilation of the Vedas and became the custodians of knowledge. A further list can be compiled of saints who inspired and led the numerous reformations and reorganizations of the Hindu doctrines in more recent times. In the epics and Puranas, myths relating to the rishis are more numerous than those told of the divinities. The basic concept which is unfolded through the mass of legendary is simple, even though the commentaries make it appear complicated. The gods, although occasionally incarnating or manifesting themselves to their peoples, selected the rishis as their usual agents and representatives, empowering these heroes to interpret the divine will according to the needs of mortals. The changes which time has wrought in the form and ideology of the Indian religions are reflected in the popular regard for the rishis. Originally, these sages were concerned principally with the rituals of the faith and were the leaders of sacrifice. As philosophy enlarged the metaphysical side of Brahmanism, the saints were viewed as great yogis or ascetics. They were the exponents of meditation and austerity, through which disciplines they acquired and maintained their internal contact with the essence of the doctrine and perfected their superhuman powers. Even today, exceptional mystics, especially those who have retired from the world, are venerated as rishis or as high disciples of these inspired teachers. Although Brahmanism is identified in the West with esoteric doctrines and practices, such a conclusion is not entirely true. The adepts and initiates of the order are acknowledged by the modern Brahmin, but he has had little, if any, direct contact with such exalted beings. Modern ascetic schools seek through the practices of yoga and other mystical disciplines to prepare disciples for the conscious experience of the hierarchy. The number of Hindus dedicated to the quest is considerable, but very few progress beyond a sincere and intense devotion to the instructions of their gurus. Such contact with the adepts as do occur are internal experiences, and about such illuminations little is said and less is written. Most of the published works dealing with the subject are founded upon reports calculated to intrigue foreigners and satisfy curiosity. Louis Jacoliot, who was for some years Chief Justice of Chandernagor, French East Indies, accumulated considerable lore relating to the theory and practice of the occult sciences in India. His summary is indicative of a serious effort to examine a most recondite subject. Unfortunately, Monsieur Jacoliot did not explain how he accumulated his data. Therefore, it is presented entirely upon his own authority. He referred to the Supreme Council of the Brahmans presided over by the Brahmatma, who had to have reached his 80th year before he could hold this exalted office. The Chief Justice writes, "Residing in an immense palace, surrounded by 21 walls, the Brahmatma showed himself to the multitude only once a year, encompassed with such pomp and pageantry that his appearance impressed the imagination of all who saw him as though they had been in the presence of a god." The same author added that the Brahmatma wore upon his tiara 2 crossed keys reminiscent of the insignia of the Roman pontiff. These keys, in the case of the great Brahman, were supposed to unlock the sanctuary of the temple of Asgartha, in which was preserved, engraved upon a golden triangle, the ineffable words, "At the death of a Brahmatma, his body was burned upon a golden tripod and his ashes secretly thrown into the Ganges." According to present belief, many temples and important shrines are now presided over by holy persons termed Brahmatmas. This seems to indicate that the central system of control has retired as the result of Mohammedan and European intrusion. Jacoliot attempted to parallel the Brahmanic mysteries with the systems of the Jewish Kabbalists and the Alexandrian Neoplatonists. He was profoundly impressed by the occult phenomena which he saw while residing in Pondicherry. Having seen the exhibitions of magic, he was inspired to examine the doctrines which made such remarkable occurrences possible. He summarized his investigation thus: "Our aim is merely to give an account of the philosophical and spiritualistic tenets of the Brahmans, as well as of the external phenomena and manifestations which are, according to them, the means whereby the Petras, or ancestral shades, demonstrate their existence and communicate with men. It is not always wise to interpret one religio-philosophical system in the terms of another. In this case, however, it is valid to indicate the indebtedness of the Mediterranean and Aegean esoteric institutions to the Hindu system. At least traditionally, the Greeks, Egyptians, Persians, and Syrians acknowledged Eastern inspiration. That which cannot be directly discovered by examining the Hindu remains can be partly reconstructed from the systems grounded in Brahmanism. Eastern philosophy reached Europe and the Near East even before the campaign of Alexander the Great. India was the motherland of world religion, and those adepts and initiates who carried the doctrine to distant places preserved the basic structure of the original revelation. Centuries after the death of Pythagoras, Apollonius of Tyana resolved to become a Pythagorean. He voluntarily accepted the disciplines of the school and attempted in every way possible to practice the Pythagorean life. He assumed the dress of the brotherhood and bound himself with the vow of silence for 5 years. Apollonius gained distinction as a sage and is included among the self-initiated disciples of the mysteries. In order to restore, if possible, the lost Pythagorean keys to the universal science, he made a journey to India following as closely as he could the route previously taken by Pythagoras. While it is most unlikely that this man of Tyana ever revealed what he learned in the East, a fragment of his account has been preserved. The third book of the Life of Apollonius of Tyana, by Philostratus the Elder, describes the journey made by Apollonius and his faithful disciple Damis to the region beyond the Ganges River. Here the philosopher was received by the Brahmans. According to Damis, the Indian sages dwelt on a hill which rose above the surrounding plain as high as the Acropolis at Athens. A cloud surrounded this elevation, permitting the wise men to be visible or invisible as they chose. The vapors made it difficult to discover the path that led to the retreat of the holy scholars. When Apollonius reached them, he found 18 mysterious, learned persons governed by Iarchus, who was seated on a lofty throne of black bronze inlaid with various designs of gold. The chairs of the other sages were likewise of bronze, but not so high and without golden ornaments. Apollonius presented his credentials, including letters from the Indian king. The Brahmans addressed the philosopher by name and conversed with him in Greek. Apollonius remained with the sages about 4 months, and during his stay they accepted both himself and Damis into their secret rites. There were many discussions of philosophy, and when it came time for the travelers to depart, the Brahmins told Apollonius that in his own country men would believe him to be a god, not only after his death, but while still he lived. During one of their conversations, Apollonius asked Iarchus whether the number of the wise men was significant. 18 was not the square of any number, nor had it been held in certain dignity and honor by the Egyptians and Pythagoreans. To this question, the head of the religious community made this curious answer: "We are neither slave to a number, nor is the number to us. But we sages are counted according to our wisdom and virtue, and are more numerous at one time and fewer at another. I am told that my grandfather in his day was chosen to be one of 27 sages, of whom he was the youngest of all, and that when he had reached his 130th year, he was the only one left here because none of his colleagues had survived and no other qualified and philosophic mind existed in India. When the Egyptians congratulated him on being one of the most fortunate of men, because he had occupied this throne alone for 4 years, he begged them to give over, reproaching the Indians for the scarcity of their philosophers." When Apollonius reached the Erythraean Sea, he returned the camels which Iarchus had loaned him for the journey home. With them he sent this letter: "Apollonius to Iarchus and the other sages, greeting. I came to you by land, and you have presented me with the sea, and by sharing your wisdom with me, you have enabled me to traverse the sky. Even among the Greeks, I shall be mindful of these teachings, so that I will converse with you as if face to face, unless I shall have drunk from the cup of Tantalus in vain. Farewell, best of philosophers." It is evident that Apollonius and his disciple never revealed the full account of their visit to the Hill of the Sages. Philostratus said that Apollonius wrote and spoke of the Brahmans enigmatically. There is a sentence twice repeated in which the philosopher summarized his experience beyond the Ganges. "I saw men dwelling on the earth and yet not on it, defended on all sides, yet without any defense, and yet possessed of nothing but what all possess." Philostratus believed that the traveler was referring to the numerous miracles and wonders which he beheld while residing among the Indian sages. It is correct to assume that Brahmanism implies the worship of Brahma. Actually, it means the acknowledgement of the authority of the Vedas, and all that this acceptance suggests. There was a gradual drift away from the sacrificial and ritualistic aspects of the religion and toward a compound of theosophical speculations. These are not actually Vedic, but are sustained by extensions of the older tradition. The compound of philosophical systems and mystical preoccupations is more correctly defined as Hinduism. Originally, Brahmanism included several systems of specialized philosophical and scientific knowledge. Just as the mystery schools of Greece and Egypt were the custodians of the secrets of medicine, architecture, statescraft, mathematics, astronomy, and music, the scholarly caste of India unfolded the essentials of a broad learning. One by one, the sciences broke away from the temple system, and each recognized some ancient initiate as its peculiar patron. It will be useful to mention a few of the rock-hewn temples associated with the Brahmanic Mysteries. They are scattered about India and are often found close to Buddhistic or Jain sanctuaries. Two of the most famous are the cave temples of Ellora in the native state of Hyderabad and those on the island of Elephanta in the harbor of Bombay. There is much difficulty in determining the antiquity of these celebrated shrines. It is usual to date them between the 7th and 10th centuries of the Christian era, but there is much to suggest a greater antiquity. It is possible that the present elaborate excavations and adornments represent more recent additions and are not the original work. There is a tradition that Pythagoras visited both Elephanta and Ellora, which were centers of Hindu culture as early as 600 BC. The popular belief that the Brahman cave temples were inspired by Buddhism is unreasonable. In any event, these caves unfold the essentials of ancient Hindu doctrine through their ornate symbolism. They were certainly used in rituals of initiation and belonged to a period when these rites were still flourishing. As opposed to the archaeological approach, there are native traditions about the Elephanta caves. According to one, they were excavated in a single night by the Pandavas, the 5 hero brothers of the Mahabharata. Another version attributed them to the Kannada king, Banasura, whose daughter dedicated herself to perpetual virginity and lived for many years on the island. A tradition probably of Mohammedan origin attributes the caves to Alexander the Great, Sikandar, whose name is associated with several works and monuments. Contrary to general opinion, the carvings at Elephanta were not mutilated by the Mohammedans and were intact in AD 1534 when the region passed into the hands of the Portuguese. These foreigners kept their cattle in the caverns during the rainy season and went to considerable pains to destroy the carvings, even bringing artillery to make certain the work of demolition. At the height of its glory, Brahmanism taught a majestic concept of universal processes. Disciplined by a profound knowledge of higher mathematics, the initiates explored many dimensions of the quantitative and qualitative universe. They held deep and learned theories about such abstractions as space, time, energy, mind, and matter. Like the members of other esoteric schools, they concealed their discoveries under elaborate emblems and figures. At the height of the philosophic period, the Vedic theology and the post-Vedic scientific method developed a cosmological and anthropological scheme of amazing profundity and integrity. As yet, the Western world has been so lacking in appreciation and interest that it has failed to examine systematically the wisdom of the East. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.